term black box in the context of science and engineering was popularized by Norbert Wiener in the mid-20th century, particularly in his work on cybernetics. However, the concept itself, referring to a system or device which can be viewed in terms of its inputs and outputs without any knowledge of its internal workings, has roots that predate Wiener. The term became widely used during the development of systems theory, control theory, and indeed early computing. But if we're giving credit for the term's popularization in science, Wiener is your go-to guy, with his knack for making complex ideas sound like they could be the next big sci-fi hit.
The inclusion of Norbert Wiener, the American physicist and mathematician, among the great thinkers in this series may seem surprising at first. But it was Wiener who concentrated our minds upon and who developed ideas which may have more impact in this century and in the centuries to come than any other line of thought. These ideas concerned complex systems, control systems, stable systems, and unstable systems. Why are some situations stable? Is it just because they are not moving, or are there certain dynamic aspects of stability? What are the basic principles of complex, dynamic systems? If we're going to deal with the world in the future, we're going to have to understand complex and ever more complex systems of this sort. Professor Wiener, are you surprised to find yourself among the great thinkers?
Should I be?
I don't know. I have no idea how often you are included among the great thinkers in the history of mankind.
I'm not sure whether I deserve that honor.
You certainly had a very successful intellectual career starting from your childhood. As a child, you were considered something of a prodigy. This undoubtedly had an effect on your character and later on influenced the course of your scientific career. You strove to be the best at everything you did, and you became known for your great ambition.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a philosopher and a mathematician, and one of the best, in fact.
You unquestionably reached that goal.
I took over where others left off and collected information and labeled this field cybernetics. The name comes from the Greek word for steersman. Cybernetics, though, may not be at all simple to understand at first glance.
I noticed that you call it cybernetics. I've always called it cybernetics.
Well, I have been known to do things differently.
Perhaps you could explain it simply, maybe by explaining the system used for aiming with anti-aircraft guns. Wasn't this your contribution to the war against Hitler?
It was really a very simple problem to solve. You could almost say trivial. Every hunter who has ever taken aim at a flying bird instinctively knows the trick. It's just a question of making use of certain available data concerning the aircraft itself and the gun's own properties. When you have this data, it's possible to determine the exact place at which you have to aim in order to hit the plane, which is, of course, still moving.
You aim ahead and then anticipate the movement of the target.
Yes, but it's not as simple as that. You have to allow for any possible maneuvers by the pilot himself as well.
In this connection, you developed the mathematical theory of predictability.
Yes, that's right. The technical limits of the aircraft and the physiological possibilities of the pilot had to be considered. These two factors form the basis for my statistical calculation of probability.
Was it technically possible to accomplish this?
With all due modesty, yes, it does seem to have worked.
How is all this an example of a cybernetic problem?
Both artillery and aircraft are components of one single dynamic system. Their relationship to each other is continuously changing, altering with the motion of the aircraft. A cybernetic problem is always connected with the control of a dynamic system.
How would you set about solving a cybernetic problem?
Through feedback. through the transmission of information between the individual elements of the system.
Could you give another example of a feedback system?
Take the control of blood flow, a self-regulating control system par excellence. It is of vital importance to animals which live in cold regions, such as the Arctic wolf. This sensor measures the temperature of the wolf's unprotected footpad. In this experiment, the animal's foot will be immersed in a bath of antifreeze to simulate the conditions of the Arctic winter at a temperature well below the freezing point of the cells. The bath is cooled by dry ice. The animal is losing heat very rapidly to the cold bath. Yet, within seconds, the foot temperature levels off just above freezing and remains there indefinitely. Rather than constricting the blood vessels, the wolf has pumped more warm blood from the trunk to the foot to keep it from freezing. The animal is controlling its blood flow so precisely that only the exact amount of blood needed to keep the foot from freezing is allowed to leave the trunk. This, then, is the cybernetic way of looking at things. As you see, it is by no means just a limited theoretical aspect with no practical application. On the contrary, cybernetics, coupled as it is with mathematical control methods for solving new problems, can be applied to all aspects of science and technology.
Does your thinking approach also apply to economics?
Indeed, it does. To some extent, it always has. Higher demand leads to higher prices. But if the price rises, then the demand decreases. That's the ordinary law of supply and demand. The same holds for the labor market as well. Wage increases that are excessive lead to unemployment, and this in turn is supposed to reduce wage demands.
Why then doesn't this seem to work anymore?
Because the connecting links and their associations are really affected by psychology. With strong labor unions or good unemployment benefits, the fear of unemployment is less than it was, and so that link is weakened. In many cases, the wage demands are not seen as the cause of inflation, but as a result of inflation. Since money has already lost its value, demanding a higher wage is not automatically going to lead to more unemployment.
So the problem with the free market is that we can never be certain of the links or of their nature when these occur within the minds of individuals.
That's true enough, but the basic principles of cybernetics still apply. It only means that we have to apply them to people as well, rather than to imagine that economics is something that happens outside people, according to certain mathematical laws.
What are the limits of the application of cybernetics to economics or human affairs?
The same difficulty applies to all mathematics. If you could define the relationships exactly before you set out, and then translate them into mathematical symbols, the mathematics would work perfectly. But it is in choosing those relationships and defining them that we have the problem. Nevertheless, we are going to have to understand ever more complex systems if we are to deal with the future. Without that understanding, there may be no future.
Science has to take the broad view, to think laterally, to see complex problems in the round. But before cybernetics, science was ill at ease with complexity, content with the simple logic of cause and effect. That narrowed what it could do, made it think in straight lines. Yet linear thinking is little help in a world where lines are rarely straight, where where things flow in circularities and cycles, moonrise and the ebb of the tide, breeding time locked into the cycle of the sun. Our world is full of strange twists and forces. Cycle interlocks with cycle to create great dynamic systems. Cybernetics asks a deep question about them. What mechanism is common to all cycles, from trees to machines? That mechanism is information, instructions. The beam of the steam pump tells the piston what to do. The piston tells the beam when it's done it. Cycles talk to themselves, a concept people have always used unknowingly. It took cybernetics to clarify it, unlock its power. All theory gives you power. Victorian theory about energy helped them change the world. The deeper the theory, the greater the power. But every theory is ultimately a dead end. Science must always begin again with deeper questions, and deep questions often have childlike answers. Who'd have thought cycles talk to each other? Cybernetics puts mystery back into the world.
What I'm trying to do as a scientist is a very simple and clear-cut story. It begins back about 1917. I was then about 19 years old. I had been brought up with every expectation of going into the Christian ministry, which in my family means the Episcopal Church. I was soaked in theology.
This is Dr. Warren McCullough, an eminent neurologist, engineer, and mathematician. It was at his world-famous lab at MIT that the original work on the frog's eye took place.
And I got seduced by mathematics, surely because there was more fun in it, and because if you know theology at all well, you'll realize that the ideas in the mind of God are mathematics and logic. So this is the way I came into the game in the first place. And I have never had but one question in the whole of my scientific life. I've only wanted to know, what is a number that a man may know it, and a man that he may know a number? I think I'm fairly clear as to the first half of it. But as the second half, a man that he may know a number, not yet. I've had to content myself with what a frog's eye tells a frog's brain, or something else of this sort. So roughly...
A frog's eye is very simple compared to a man's brain, an organ so complex that even the most optimistic believe that it will be centuries before we unravel all its mysteries. Yet, Dr. McCullough and his colleagues believe they are beginning to understand how the higher nervous system, a man's brain, might work as a machine. A machine basically different in principle from anything we can now build. Much more subtle than even our most sophisticated computers.
Now, may I make clear a distinction between your nervous system and any computing machine which is yet in existence? There is some beginning to approximate it. They are to be found chiefly in bombers and things of this sort. Now, in an ordinary machine, operations are carried out sequentially. And a mistake entails mistakes which follow inevitably from it all the way through the computation. As opposed to this, there are parallel machines. That is, machines which carry on the same computation in 1, 2, 3 or more channels. compare the results, and don't go ahead until the results agree. These are strictly parallel. I'm not talking about either of these kinds of machines. I'm talking about machines which resemble, let's say, the mouth of the Danube, or the mouth of the Nile, or better yet, the mouth of the Swanee River. These are what the Greeks called anastomotic affairs. That is, the water from each contributory stream is mixed with the water from every other contributory stream before they finally get out the mouths of the river. Is that clear? There is no other word that I know for it except the old Greek word anastomotic. They're not merely braided together where the braids follow through. No. They're braided with an intermixture so that the information coming out at any one point in the mouth is combined from the information coming in from all of the sources of that river. Is this clear? Good. What is more, well, any man my age knows this very well. Neurons die at the order of thousands of neurons per day. We're built to run well to the 16th year of age, roughly. From that time on, you begin to be able to count the holes where there were cells and there are no more. So, you have to design it so that a cell, while it's a-dying, it's apt to go pip, 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 prrrr, and then quit. And after it's dead, it's not going to make too much difference. You would probably find at least 10% of the big cells in my cerebellum, where you could count them, are just holes filled up with glia, glue cells, supporting cells. So this kind of thing happens all the time and must happen. And yet we can go on to, well, in my family, to 100.
And the theory that you're working on explains...
The theory that we're working on takes care of all of these things. That's the important point about it.
In the summer, Dr. McCullough, his wife, and grandchildren moved to a country home in New England. All that was missing in this peaceful spot was a lake. And 30 years ago, McCullough dammed up a stream to complete his Eden. What is man? A child of nature. But now, wondering whether he can ever learn enough to make something like himself in a laboratory. What is the limit of our possible knowledge and power? Will we one day in the distant future perhaps even create beings superior to ourselves? Beings who will survive us on this planet? Dr. McCullough thinks it possible.
No, I would expect that insofar as machines might survive man, they might, they would only carry on, in a sense, the same direction, same general direction, that man would have carried on if he could have. Am I clear? So to speak, the machines would be standing on our shoulders.
Somehow the purpose that a machine, no matter how complicated and how clever, could have, to my mind, isn't equatable. When man has gone, these machines would in essence be purposeless.
I doubt that. I would say, in essence, they would be purposeful.
And there would be, in your feeling, nothing gone and nothing missing from the world.
Well, you mean in the sense in which the dinosaurs are missing?
No, I mean in the sense of something important.
Well, aren't they important? Weren't they important? I mean, there's one thing you could be pretty sure of: man won't survive forever. what we know of the sun and of other stars, that would be the most improbable thing. Something else will come.
And in your opinion, it might be something of man's own creation?
Yes.
Well, here's the problem that I'm trying to get at. Here's the thing that I'm trying to get at. You have two grandchildren right there. And I can't see that a machine will ever feel toward any of its
Why not?
creatures the way you feel about them. That's the one thing that I can't get.
Well, I think I could set it up for you, because I'm certain that if I do it, there is a mechanism that can do it. If I can manage to state that in a finite and unambiguous manner, then I think it can be done. And I see no reason why we can't develop a logic of relations in time to come. Granted, it's defective at the present time. Don't shake the table.
And it's a worry with AI, as you know. I don't know if people have tried it. I almost don't want to tell them that it's possible. I'm sure most people know. But you can go to your ChatGPT or whichever is your AI of choice on your computer and say, I want to write a screenplay. I want it to be about a spy who is probably on his last uppers and is a bit alcoholic and he gets his last chance. You know, whatever cliche you come up with. So, but I want it to be a fresh story and I want there to be a lot of betrayal. Can you rough it out for me? And the AI will instantly provide a story for you. And then you go, well, go drill a bit deeper, please. I want the first act to, and it will start doing it for you. And it's deeply
It will write, for an interview, it will write questions. So you could put into ChatGPT and other various forms of that particular genre of platform. You can put into that, you can input 10. Can you please come up with 10 questions that Chris Evans might ask Stephen Fry?
Good Lord.
Yeah, so they can do it. I mean,
Yes,
but the thing is, though, they say, every invention, every sort of new pasture, there's always a technology behind it. So one could say, because everybody's talking about AI, of course they are, one could say that was the fountain pen the right thing to do after the quill? Because it accelerates the process too much if you're around at the time. I'm sure that was an exponential kind of leap forward. Is it not just our version of that? Of course, it's more hyperbolized. It's more threatening. We're more connected and disconnected than ever before.
I'm no enemy of technology at all, but I think it's also important to look backwards at talking of that Jung phrase, the collective unconscious. This whoever it was who invented these stories in Greek myth. I'll give you an example which relates to AI directly of how stories that are told by the communal mind of people trying to understand who we are, because that's the most extraordinary question. None of us asked to be born, and here we are, and we have this strange living thing inside our brain, our consciousness, our sense of who we are, what it's like to be ourselves, our Stephenness and our Christness and our Vassusness that is unlike anything else, and it drives us sometimes to do terrible things, and it drives us to yearn and to want and to decide and all these things. And naturally, the first thing we did when we had language, which is only 80,000 years ago maximum, is ask us why we were different from animals. Why are we different? And so in the Greek myth, Prometheus makes us human beings, and Zeus breathes into us, and his daughter Athena breathes her wisdom into us, and Zeus is delighted. They can worship us, and they can play with us, and they can be fun. And Prometheus says yes, and I'll teach them how to make pots and metal. And Zeus goes, whoa, no. He says you can do anything, these people, but don't give them fire. Never give them fire. And Prometheus says, why not? He said, well, if you give them fire, and by fire we mean both literal fire that allows the technology for melting and smelting and roasting and toasting, but also the divine fire. The divine fire that is that consciousness that I was talking about, that awareness, that creative spark, that fire. Well, Prometheus disobeys him, and he takes fire from heaven. and he gives it to mankind. And Zeus looks down and sees these lights going off and this fire, and he is furious because he thinks this is the end for us. One day they won't need us. One day we will be replaced because they can now do everything. They can create. They have the divine fire. And so he punishes Prometheus terribly, chains him to the mountains. He has his liver pecked out every day by a vulture or an eagle, and it grows back overnight because he's immortal. Anyway, all of that was, people then, this was replaced by the Garden of Eden and other creation myths in most of our culture. But by the 15th, 16th century, we started to lose a little bit of the stranglehold of the ecclesiastical power of the hierarchies of the church and so on, partly through printing in 1450, the first printing coming out. And then this was followed by what we call the Age of Reason, Newton and Galileo and so on, starting to ask questions they hadn't been allowed to be asked. And then the Enlightenment and Romanticism, and at the beginning of Romanticism, as suddenly Prometheus was our new Christ, because he was the creator who didn't sacrifice himself for us in the way that Christ did for sin, but because the gods were angry with us and the gods were jealous. And this gave humanism this great impetus, this spark of self-confidence to be a human, and we don't have to apologize to God all the time for the crime of having been born. And within a very short space of time, Beethoven wrote The Creatures of Prometheus, one of his finest pieces of music. Shelley wrote Prometheus Unbound, and more importantly, Shelley's wife, Mary Shelley, wrote Frankenstein, whose subtitle is A Modern Prometheus, about the creation. And then you think, okay, well, that's interesting. But now, this moment, as I'm talking to you, we are faced with exactly the same quandary that Zeus and Prometheus faced. We have made entities that are sort of like the first man before it had fire. Jolly clever and sweet, and they can obey us and do our bidding, just as first man did. But some of us are Zeus and said we must not give them consciousness. We must not give them the divine spark, or they won't need us anymore, and we will be sidelined and possibly even totally destroyed and made extinct. And others, the Prometheuses in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, are saying, oh no, give it to them. It'd be so exciting. It'd be so exciting. Now, isn't that extraordinary? A story that is thousands of years old, that seems so irrelevant in some ways, and about the creation of mankind. It contains a kernel of truth that is achieved by different people swapping ideas about why we are different. What is it we've got? It's something that because they can look at other animals. They mate, they excrete, they eat, just like us. But they don't do the things we do. They don't build cities. They don't write music. They're just so where did we get it from? It's a spark. We've got a thing that others don't. And that thing, which is such a puzzle, they call it the hard problem of consciousness in philosophy, don't they? That thing, maybe a machine will get it. We don't know how we got it, because we are machines. We just happen to be biological ones. But we still follow the laws of cause and effect and electricity and chemistry and everything else.
Right, as a simpleton, one zooms out, and isn't this just rinse and repeat? Wasn't it always going to end up this way?
Yes, exactly. And it may have happened many, many times. It reminds me of the Douglas Adams thing about, when someone understands the infinite complexity, madness, eccentricity, weirdness of the universe, when someone suddenly understands it, it will instantly disappear and be replaced by an even weirder and more eccentric one. And the other theory is that this has already happened, which I think is very Douglas Adams. But yes, that's right, rinse and repeat, as you say.